You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
No. Roll piece of newspaper. No.
All right, so let's get started.
Yes.
Hey, Jeeples. Welcome to another episode of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. I'm Kevin, the engineer, the tech guy, the one who reads instructions and uses a torque wrench, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm Scott. I'm the slapstick parts guy with a whole Jeep full of instructions I'm going to have to try and start reading that unfortunately I probably won't get to because I'm going to be too bored, then therefore rescuing by Kevin when I call him up saying, Kevin, I can't figure it out.
Okay, I think
Flow
I got
chart.
all that. Flow chart, yeah. So anyhow, the whole point of that, folks, is remember, we will share what worked for us as well as what didn't. But it's really up to you to decide what you want to do to your Jeep. So, as we always say, please do your own research. Read the instructions.
And follow them.
Yes. And something new, just as a teaser to those of you listeners out there, we're trying something new for our Patreons.
Yes.
Right now, making us very nervous, sitting off to my left and Scott's right, is a little red blinking light going, recording. Yes, folks, there's a behind-the-scenes video going on of this recording session.
Yes.
And Scott will... I don't know how much magic he'll work on it or not. It might be pretty raw.
I am not wearing a leather suit.
And you'll have to join the Patreons to find out what he's talking about.
Nah, that's all right, guys, right? All right, so...
Oh, heavens.
Speaking of Patreon,
yeah.
I posted a picture up about my spark plugs I did the other day.
Yeah, folks, we're going to start the show off kind of technical. This one that Scott was talking to me that he had that deep sigh going. Dory's Jeep was missing.
Yeah, well, the occasional
hesitating stumble and so it's like, well, when do you want to look at it? He said, well, I'm going to look at it myself. He said, I'm going to do a tune-up. And
I did.
He did.
In October, I did the left side.
And it is now...
I don't know.
June, and he's just getting around. And
I've
it's
been
a
through
V6.
a lot. In my defense,
he
I've
did
been through a lot.
3 spark plugs.
I did the one that was misfiring and clicking.
In October. So he's been running around. I'm just sitting there, the engine's going, broof, broof, broof.
Everything's all wabbajaw. Wait, can I say wabbajaw?
Whatever. So, anywho, why don't you they can go on the Patreon page and take a look at the pictures, but I think he did find his stumble and hesitation.
Yeah, I got my 107,000 miles out of those plugs, and looking at the gap, I was like, whoa.
This wasn't a gap, folks. This looked like the inside of a letter C. The electrode was basically carved away like a crescent moon.
I'm a parts guy. I'm not a technician, okay?
But as a parts guy, you ought to know what they should look like.
Well, yeah.
Good shit.
Yeah, the plumber's house, plumbing doesn't work. The roofer's house leaks, I mean, come on. The electrician's left. Half the stuff doesn't work. I mean, come on. Parts guy, yeah. I can tell you what you need to do to your Jeep because I'm making a paycheck. But me, no, it can last a little longer. But I do the oil changes.
Well, that's true. He does keep up with the maintenance that will cause catastrophic failure.
But yeah.
Mainly because if Dory's Jeep catastrophically failed, I think Scott would have to catastrophically fail along with it.
And we're going to get to that later.
We are, yeah.
That's a teaser. Not only a moment of silence for my ability to put things off, also a moment of silence for Mike Cable number 2. Ooh, back at you, Patreon. So, anywho, yeah. What are you checking at the angle of the dangle there?
Yeah, well, the cable.
Exactly.
It's a dead cable.
No. So, back on track.
Yeah, and I, too, had my fun-filled couple of weeks here. Folks, I've got to kind of hang my head a little bit, and I've said it, and this will be about the 5th time. But, the passenger step on Slightly Altered.
Yeah, your career side of your vehicle.
Decided to jam yet again. And sigh. Every time I think I've got it fixed, it turns around and tells me, no.
Nope.
Now, this time, however, And I'll go ahead and share the story.
Pinky swear? You think you got it?
No, I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
It is behaving itself for the moment.
Okay.
I do not swear that it is fixed. However, this time it did something it's never done before, Scott.
Woke you up at breakfast?
Nope.
No.
It jammed hard. Nothing would release it. I actually sat down and I said, I got kind of ticked at myself because it's jammed again. You're an engineer with 40 years experience. You should have figured this out already. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So after beating myself up and then going in and bandaging my wounds.
Quit hitting yourself. Quit hitting yourself.
Yeah. I said, okay, let's just start with a piece of paper, literally. And, all right, open the door. Jammed. Take the lower mounting bolts off. Still jammed. Take the rocker panel bolts off, leaving just the center one to keep this thing up.
Right.
Still jammed. And folks, this is what's different is it's not loosening up. It used to just randomly start working again. So from a problem solving, this was actually a good thing that it was not operating. The bad thing was I took the last bolt off. Scott wasn't there to help. Nobody was there. I was kind of doing it by myself, and I was twisted sideways, and the step came off unexpectedly.
Sudden gust of gravity, as we like to call it.
Yeah, and it put me out of commission for a day or two because they're rather heavy. Twisted my back and the shoulder. But regardless, at that point I was angry, mostly at myself. I bought a new gas pressure strut for this thing. I bought a new drive motor gear reduction assembly for this thing. There's nothing left,
Yeah, you've thrown a lot of parts at it.
And so, okay, I picked myself up and the step. Fortunately, I had a rubber mat on the floor, so it didn't ding it up. It just bruised my pride and ego. And
nothing but a fatal wound to the man's ego. Brought to you by Channel 9.
So I went up and I clamped the thing to my welding table.
Okay.
So that it would operate. You know how the step comes out at an angle out of the housing, and we had to, last time you helped me, we had to kind of hold the thing up to make it operate off the Jeep.
Yeah.
So I clamped it in a position where it was free to operate. I'm like, okay, that probably dropping the bloody thing on the floor, it's going to operate now, and nope, still jammed. I'm going, okay, more info. And I'm making notes about,
Right.
Because, folks, what I'm doing here is I'm going, all right, was it warped when it was installed? Is the body of the Jeep twisted, causing the thing to jam? By taking the bolts out and letting it relax, I can find out, no, okay, that wasn't the cause. It wasn't that I had it twisted or the bolts weren't lined up or something like that. I was using external power after that as opposed to the control module. So I know it wasn't the control module because even my power probe, which isn't amperage limited, was going overload. So I was like, okay.
Danger.
So I'm like, all right, well, now let's start with the new components. So let me take the gas strut off. And that's a lot of fun, folks. Scott gave me a hand with that, putting it on. That's 90 pounds of force out of this little... I think it's an 8-inch stroke nitrogen-filled cylinder.
Yeah.
It's a strong little booger.
1 foot up on the dashboard, you're going...
It's exactly. So I took the strut off. Stop. Right. Check it. Nope. And the cylinder's sticking. All right. Let me go ahead and pull the actual linkage off from the swing arm, the gear drive that actually drops it. And the step goes kerfunk all by itself.
Right.
Okay, it's not the step being bound because the step was free. So I tried to put motor voltage. I figured, well, now it's got to move.
Right.
Nope.
Nothing.
All right. Well, then we know it's here. Did I somehow trash the brand new, motor and drive? And folks, these steps use essentially the power window crank drive assembly. It's a worm gear drive motor and reduction gear out of a anywhere from a mid 90s through mid teens Ford products, the big trucks, the big cars, any of the big windows. It's a big, heavy, beefy motor. So I'm like, all right, 3 bolts to take the motor gear drive out in its mounting frame. Put it on the bench. It's got to work now, right?
Right. Nope.
I'm like, okay, I burned the motor up. I got to burn the motor up. Let me take the 3 screws that the gearbox mounts to the frame. They're just little hex screws, you know. Said, well, let's go ahead one more time. Spun like crazy. I'm like, okay, stop right here.
Now we got a problem.
Back up.
A solution.
Well, we don't know because we worked on this before. And you remember we put spacers in there before on the prior motor, and it seemed to work, but then jammed again. So I'm sitting there going, something's not kosher here. So I put the assembly back together, and when I first put it back together, it worked. It started working again. I'm like, that's not what I need to know. And I was like, well, let me kind of snug those bolts down a little more, those three things. And it went, zzz, 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 and it jammed again. And I'm like, okay, this is data.
Right.
Took the three bolts out. Zzz, 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 works beautiful. Started looking. Same place we saw all the wear before.
Right.
It's galled and scarred again. All right, so folks, what you have here is a motor that it's a 90-degree drive. So the motor and then the output shaft is at 90 degrees to the center line of the motor.
Right.
And it's got a little steel shaft. It's an axle shaft that sticks out. And concentric around that is a square hole around that shaft. And that hole is what is hooked, and it looks just like a half-inch socket on the drive end. Not on the end that goes over the nut, but the one you put on your wrench.
Right.
And the little pin comes out the middle of that. And you slide either your window crank or your gear, in my case, a little arm, over that. It has a square notch on the back that slides into that hole, and that's what is the drive. And I'm looking at that angled arm where it's rubbing against the plate. And I'm going, that makes no sense. And then I had an epiphany, Scott. The one thing we didn't do when we worked on it last time with you and me is I
Hit it with a bigger hammer?
Nope. Walk over to the other side, which has never failed in 5 years, and check the play on that. I didn't take it off. I could lay down and just open it up. And I went in there and I was able to take a screwdriver, and I noticed that crank arm moved in and out on that shaft, just a couple of thousandths. Kind of like backlash in the rear end, and it hit me. I do not have any backlash. I have zero backlash. This thing fits so perfect. And then I started thinking, when did it jam? When it was hot.
Metal expands.
Metal expands when it's hot. So I started looking at this thing, and I started kind of judging was okay. When we tore the other one apart, the shaft was bent, right, on the motor. Well, the shaft, folks, for this worm drive crank assembly is a long, thin, quarter-inch diameter rod. It's actually the axle of the motor. And then the gear, the reduction gear, which is the driven gear, the teeth aren't flat around the radius. They're actually in a semicircular trough, if you can imagine, around the perimeter. It's like a V-groove pulley, except that it's got teeth in the V-grooves.
Right.
And if you push that pulley sideways against the worm gear, which is that shaft with a spiral on it. Think of a pen spring wrapped around a steel shaft. You're going to side load that gear and it's going to jam. And I'm going, I'm side loading that. And in fact, after a while, guess what you'll do? You'll bend that shaft.
Right.
What did we find?
A bent shaft.
A bent shaft. So I'm going, suddenly the brain goes into gear, and you can actually hear the rusty old gears that have been disengaged for a while when I've been playing it being retired. Oh, hey, wow. Anyway, so I looked at that crankshaft and I looked at the end pin, and I realized that the butt end of that square, we always paid attention to the other end that was rubbing on the plate. The butt end of that thing had all the casting flashing, and in fact wasn't even flat where it seated down in that square hole. It looked like somebody peened it with a hammer. And I said, well, that's the one part I really can't buy. Oh well.
Get out the grinder.
I actually used my 4-inch wide tabletop belt sander.
There you go.
And went to the end of that and sat there and fired it up and zzz, 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 kept turning it. And I took it down from being this kind of domed-ish shape to a flat surface, knocked the corners off all four edges so that it was now a nice, neat, looked like a socket extension, and slid it back down into the housing, and it worked before loose, but it fit fine. Carefully reassembled, I cleaned up the galling a little bit, cleaned up the mounts, tightened them back down tight the way they should be, and then went in there and checked for free play. And I had about 3,000s back and forth free play, which was similar to the other side.
Other side, yeah.
And now I put it on there, and so then I slowly reassembled the step, checking each step, realigning the cranks. Folks, they use little plastic shims in between the crank arm and the pivot pins and that stuff so that you don't have it in bind because, there's some tolerances in the adjustment. Had to do that about 3 times, moving the little shims around, and then, of course, putting that gas strut in by myself.
I think I heard cussing from my work.
You probably did. It probably threw me on the floor a time or two as I'm trying to push it back in. And yes, folks, I was working it at the fully.
Right back at it.
And so far, it did stick one time, but I'm pretty sure that was actually a low voltage situation because as soon as I sat there and had this, you know what? Let me just start the Jeep. It hasn't run in a while, and the system is voltage sensitive, and that's kind of what it is. Its safety limits are. Fired the Jeep up, and it opened perfectly. Once I was back up, it has continued to work properly and smoothly ever since. Even though we have now had several 103-degree days. So what I'm getting at, folks, with that little story is there is a process.
Yep, that's what I say.
Even though, and even somebody like me who was trained and has that little piece of paper on the wall, no, they can't see it. Scott, the camera's facing the other way.
I know.
Will occasionally get in this mindset of, well, I know what's wrong. And guess what? You don't know till you sit down and you go through the process of elimination. I am reasonably confident that I've identified the problem. I'm going to maintain myself an open mind until I get at least a year's continuous use of that sucker. But that's kind of the way the troubleshooting should be done. And I kick myself for not doing that over the past couple of months. Yes, sir.
Well, you actually brought up a very good point, and I kind of wanted to I guess, move on along that idea with my idea of Tales from the Parts Cave. And, because us parts guys, we're just trolls that, hide around, what do you need, that kind of thing. But as you talk about the process of elimination, and again, I see it all the time. People come in and say, oh, I know what's wrong. And again, I'm guilty of it too.
They do part swapping.
Well, again, when me LJ, all of a sudden I got a pirate all of a sudden.
You are in Tampa.
No, but
Jose Gaspar.
He got me. So when I was leaving therapy one night, I started the Jeep and I'm like, oh man, it can't be the battery. Shut it off. I'm 30 miles from home.
Click, 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 click.
Room. Okay, I'm not doing that again. And I'm like, okay, my battery, I just brand new battery, like, okay, I wasn't driving the LJ daily and, okay, maybe I had other problems. So I drove it home, backed up in the driveway, turned the key, it was done. I'm going, okay, it's the battery. So I pull the battery out. I know it's the battery. Take it to the auto place. Excuse me. And they hook it up to the
It's discharged, but it's not dead.
Well, oh my God, I just went through this yesterday. Where the
load tester.
Thank you, load
tester.
test. I cannot for the life of me remember load testing lately. But I put a load test on, and they go, "Yeah, battery's fine." I'm like, no, it can't be. The guy's like, are you sure? Your alternator good? I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, it's not the starter. He goes like, are you sure it's not the starter? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not the starter. The starter's new. I found myself going to the same
how
trapping.
many years ago?
Same trapping we all do. I took it to work.
Yeah.
I carried that battery to work
so you could
because
check
I
it.
couldn't believe him because I wanted to do my load tester work. We got this huge rolling on a cart load tester, goes in a room kind of thing,
right?
And it tested fine. I'm like, oh, crap. So I pull the starter out and proceed to pour the quart of oil out of it.
Out of the starter.
And I go, well, there's my problem.
Yeah.
Put the new starter in, and believe me, it goes, I'm like, well.
Yeah, but did you drill a hole in the bottom of the new starter so it can relieve all the leaking oil from the rear main seal?
No, it's got a 12,000-mile oil change. So in a year, I'll go ahead and replace it and just drain it out and fill it with new.
I would say we need to do your rear main seal. If you can fill up a starter housing with leaked oil.
I'm taking a 5-day vacation to do the rear main seal, oil pan gasket, valve cover gasket, the tune-up, All the other parts I just bought, I got to do. So what are you doing saying the entire month of July?
Well, it depends on if I get my new position, but we'll see.
Fair enough. So on that note, so because it's a long segment,
Yeah.
Did you want to go ahead and jump in the garage real quickly? Because on that, or did you have something else to continue with that?
No. It's just generally speaking that we are all subject to those human errors of thinking we know the answer, but we haven't done our homework. And, I got to hang my head as one of the guys that beats on everybody saying, "Did you do your homework?" And here I'm guilty of.
Well, I can't go back to that AutoZone. I got to go to the one across the city. I'm not going back. Hey, look, it's a starter guy. What'd you break now? I'm like, who? Okay. No habla español or no habla inglés. I'm just the token bald guy with a goatee. There's lots of us out there,
Okay, we're going downhill fast, folks.
Yes, we are. So we're going to take a quick little break because, like we just talked about batteries, oh boy, my saga continues with our next battery story. But stick around. We're going to charge on into that next subject.
Oh, he's on a roll again, folks.
Well, we're just going to amp this up for next time, right? We will be right back.
Like that's a shocker.
Oh, you get the last one. We'll be right back. Radio drop. Hey, thanks for taking a quick little break with us right now. We're over here at the sprawling Studio A in undisclosed part of Florida with Kevin. Just to remind you guys to check out the 4x4 Radio Network as always. And I want to give a big thank you to Ron at Red Scorpion Fab Works for some help with some things. Mm-hmm. Also, Crawling for the Fallen is coming up soon.
Oh, yeah.
And they had a little small change with their venue. Chrissy and the group are working diligently to change things. That's coming up really soon in November. So it's going to be, from what I hear, a lot bigger area. And again, not only a moment of silence for Mike Cord number 2, but a moment of silence for the Jeep Ranch, because unfortunately they are now closed.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they will become tract housing and shopping malls and other fun things that we all have learned to. We can't live without, I suppose.
I'll try. But so on that note, so stay tuned for important update announcements. And as always, also check out our Patreon page because we got some new stuff working out for the Patreon for exclusive content. And a big thank you to all of our new recent Patreons as I wave to the camera. So on that note, we're going to switch gears back onto the show. Anything else you want to add, Mr. Kevin?
Nope, that'll do it.
Sweet. And on back to the show we go. Okay, buddy, I got the garage door. I think I need to put a little lube in it because unfortunately it sounds really, really rusty.
Well, you could update the sound, loop for the newer garage door I put in, but then nobody would hear it.
Well, you could use mine now, but you hear nothing but Lil Wayne music. Moving on. Someone by my house. So on that note, hi. So real quickly, as we teased in the last part, hi, Patreon. Basically, so last night I'm driving home from work, and my wife says, "Honey, how far away are you out?" I'm like, "Oh, I should be home about 30 minutes." She goes, "Okay, good. The Jeep died." I just put the spark plugs in yesterday. What I didn't, it won't. It just click, 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 click. I'm like,
click, click, click.
I just when I did the spark plugs, I charged the 7-year-old Optima battery. I mean, it's a gel cell. They last forever, right? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe I killed it. So we get in there, Patreon. I'm looking at you. I haven't even bought my fire extinguisher yet. I had to go shame walk to the Publix to buy jumper cables. Okay, $12 cost $7 everywhere else. No, because I procrastinate. I had to buy $12 jumper cables. So I put them on, and the windows go up a lot better, but that's just volts. You know what I mean? And it just click, click, click. So like an idiot, I'm there just bumping up to 1200 RPM because I get that little bit. You don't have to rev it, you just get a little bit. And Dory's like, just give it a minute. I'm like, all right, cool. It's really hot. I want to go home. The ice cream is now soup. And all of a sudden, click, click, click. Okay, it's better. 5 more minutes. Don't look at me. Just 2 Jeeps with the hood up in their natural habitat, broken down. Do. Click, click, click. Okay, I'm done. That's it. Everything in the LJ. Of course, there's no room in the LJ because I got my spare tire at the junk. I'm trying to move my house. I'm stuffing my wife literally into the cab of the truck. We get home, yada, yada, yada. I go buy a new battery, put it in. It takes me 3 minutes, which is kind of scary. It's almost a NASCAR pit stop.
Yep.
Put it right in, and Dory goes, I don't want to start it. I'm like, just turn the key. Vroom, it starts up beautifully.
Yeah.
So explain to me again, we had, after Kevin's pre-talk, I had a little bit of occasional drag on the battery, but again, I charged it. It worked fine. Explain to me why it can go perfect one day and then just boom the next.
And that's one of the lovely side effects of the AGM spiral core batteries. Folks, I'll try not to go too technical on this, but the old days, they're going to go back to the old lead acid batteries. And
Right.
you had these plates, and they kind of look like thin waffle plates. Like somebody had poured a bunch of lead into a waffle maker. And
Oh, this probably tastes terrible. Tastes like slow, painful death.
I was going to say a little toxic too, covered with an acid syrup. Well, that's what they're full of. So anyhow,
That's one spicy death ball.
look up the 70s reference there, folks. So anyhow, they were fairly heavy. It was actually considered a sponge lead.
Okay.
Had a lot of little air pockets, and the idea was to get surface area up because that's where the chemical reaction comes in. He is having a meltdown over here, folks.
Sponge lead hot pants. This is what's in my mind. Sorry, moving on.
Oh, he can take any technical situation and turn it into bad humor.
Hey, Jeepers, are you ready for some bad, terrible puns? Here we go.
Now, let's see if I can get back on track. So
I'm
anyway,
sorry, sponge lead.
The leads are. You're going to take this one to town too. They're doped with various chemicals. I told you couldn't handle it, guys. And to create the negative plate and the positive plate. And that's an actual term you use when you add certain materials to the molten lead to give it certain electrochemical characteristics.
Okay.
Well, you had a lot of mass there, and the truth was a lot of that lead really was never in contact with acid, the electrolyte, which is the fluid that helps the electrons move from the negative plates to the positive plates. And the reason I'm going through this little history is you had a lot of meat there.
Right.
So when your batteries got older and they would sulfate up, I'm sure you've heard that term. That there's a crystalline growth of different sulfates, lead sulfates on the plates. And the reason they screw up the battery is, of course, they don't conduct electricity from the electrolyte or the electrons through the electrolyte to the lead. And so the battery begins to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And it's a progressive thing.
Right, because it also causes more resistance to charge and yada, yada, yada.
And then you can also, though, people would say, I can fix that battery, and they can either add something that dissolves the lead sulfate. Some people used to use Epsom salts, which was okay. Yes. Go on YouTube. You'll find all kinds of crazy things. Usually they kill the battery. They may bring it back for a short while, but they'll kill it in short order.
I'm using Mom's hot sauce.
Yeah. Who knows? It might work. Yours would probably work better. But yeah.
Speaking of taste like death.
He does make toxic hot sauce. But anyhow.
Hey, it's garlic flavored death. Thank you.
But there's a lot of meat there. So you could get the sulfates to crack off and sink to the bottom of the cell, and you'd have fresh lead to work with.
Right.
Let's spring forward to, let's grab the one big, the name brand that everybody knows in the spiral wound cells, the Optimus.
Right.
And what they came up with was a very, very thin plate. Very thin to the point that it wouldn't hold itself up. Okay. It was more like screen. Okay. Lead screening.
Okay.
And since it wouldn't physically hold itself together in hanging like the old batteries did in the cell, it was really good that it was a lot of surface area, which means you got a whole lot of amperage out of it, and you could basically use all of the lead, depth-wise, the thickness, but it couldn't hold itself up.
Okay.
So how do I make it hold it up? Well, let's basically layer it with a porous material between it.
Okay.
So they used like a fiberglass mat or an inorganic mat, and they would just build this sandwich up with positive, negative, positive. And then somebody said, that's really cool, but it's still not real stable. Well, let's roll it up like a, paper towel tube. And they found out that it was really vibration resistant. And then they figured out, well, what if I do like napalm the acid, turn it into a gel and saturate everything with a gel. Now I have a viscous material with a structural support with nice thin lead plates that can charge real easy and discharge real easy. Now you have the Optima battery.
Right.
And it's a neat technology. You're using the physical attributes along with the electrochemical attributes to create a high capacity, high amperage discharge rate. But what you're running into with your situation is that, remember I said that the thick plates, you could kind of lose some of it, and if it scaled off, you had meat behind it to work with?
Right.
Yeah, you scale off these little thin screens of lead, you got nothing behind it.
Yeah, we talked about one time where it breaks the plate and drops.
Yeah, that's the big plates. But in these, they're not going to drop. But once they burn through the connections, so to speak, you can lose a few due to corrosion, due to age, due to sulfating, because it is a mesh. And so you got all the little, think of it as the vertical wires on the screen to carry the current from that plate. And the next plate has its vertical wires, and all the horizontal ones are kind of holding it together. And I'm being very simple, and so those of you in the battery world are going, well, that's not exact. I know it's not exact.
You hear the keyboard clicking.
But it's as close an analogy as I can get.
Right.
But as you lose more and more of those verticals, more and more amperage is carried on the remaining vertical strands of lead, increasing the load on them, causing them to erode quicker, until eventually you get to the point where, well, if you're just checking voltage, and I only have one thread left, you'll read 12 volts. Because you still have the potential, as they call it,
right,
of all the lead that's in there. But the current path for that power to come out, as soon as you turn that key, that thread's gone.
And it pops like a fuse.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happens. And then once you break, a few plates, you've lost your continuity and you lose the cell. And you don't have the amperage. You may still have the voltage. The truth is that if you take using the old one, if you guys ever remember where you would use any acid, vinegar, and a copper penny and a piece of zinc, right, you can make a little 1.5 volt cell. Well, if you have just a tiny little shred of copper and a tiny little shred of zinc and put it in there, you'll still have 1.5 volts.
Right.
You just won't have any amperage because there's not enough material there. Well, as long as you still have a shred of that plate touching the acid and connected to the post, you're still going to read the potential of your 12 volts or 1.5 per cell. But as soon as you try to draw current, it's not there.
Right.
So that's one of the things with gel cells is that they're very good at delivering a very large amount, these spiral mats, a very large amount of power. And they can do it continuously and repeatedly, and they can handle vibrations. But when they go, they're gone. And they don't give you a whole lot of warning.
Yeah, well,
there's not that slow degradation. You get some,
yeah,
but you become, because it's done very slowly over time, you kind of adapt. You're used to rum to rum to rum rum rum. And you don't really catch the fact that it's taking longer and slower to start because it's still starting and it's just normal, because it's a little bit each time till you finally get to that click, 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 and it's like, it can't be dead. It just started, and
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to doom the starter, because even the jumper cables didn't work.
Well, that's because your battery still has the ability to take some current. And here's the thing, folks. If you're jumping with a shorted battery, you can jump all you want. It's going to draw more current away from the starter, which won't let it spin. And I'm guessing that you had a cell that not only, fell away from providing current, but it was shorting between cells.
Right.
So that essentially you had a lead wire between your positive and negative that was sucking anything in there.
Yeah, because I can't go back to that one AutoZone anymore, so I have to find a new one.
Find a new one.
Yeah.
Now, that does not mean, let me make this point blank, does not mean there's anything wrong with spiral wound AGM batteries. They are a very good system. They just have a different end-of-life characteristic than a wet cell. Same thing with the new lithium-ion batteries. They have a different end-of-life behavior as well. And they even have a different end of charge. Most lead acids, and I don't care whether it's an AGM or a wet, have a taper down. You can, oh my God, my battery's getting weak,
Right.
Lithium ions don't do that. They pretty much are a flat line output till they hit whatever, I forget what it is, and somebody will correct me on this.
It's almost like a regulator in a scuba tank.
Yeah, you get to that last poof, and it just drops. And I mean, it drops hard and fast. There's no warning. You can have the 12.8 volts, 12.8 volts, 12.8, 12.75, 6 volts. 2 volts, 1 volt. I'm dead.
So a lot of these newer electric cars use lithium ions. How are they able to have a fuel gauge? Finger quotations. Do you think it might be something they just calculate in the computer? Like, here's your driving style versus miles driven, and here's your estimated fuel?
They could do it that way. You can measure those factors. It's just a very, very rapid degradation, but there is a over time linear. It's just very small. You wouldn't see it on a manual, on a regular gauge that only reads to 10th of a volt. They may be reading to the 100th of a volt.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that go into it, but I'm pretty sure, and I haven't studied how they monitor the fuel tank on those lithium ions. But yeah, it's the lithium ions, particularly in the ones that you buy now, they're just now coming out with Li batteries for vehicles. And, I'm starting to see them in my other world of my RV world. You can get house batteries that are LIs, and they're really neat. But everybody says they run right up full voltage till they belly up. And the good news is if you run any one of the lead acid batteries, gel cells, AGM, or even wet cells, and you run it all the way down, you shorten the battery life. There are deep cycle ones that are made to give you a longer deep run, but even those, you only want to take them down to probably 80% discharge, 75 to 80% discharge, and it might be a little less, might be a little more depending on the manufacturer, but you don't take them flat.
Okay, why is that?
Well, it causes the plate to degrade because now you're going to create these sulfites and these nasty side effect chemicals, and they don't re-dissolve when you charge. Most do, but some don't. The lithium ions you can take down, and again, this is generally speaking, those of you can do your research and tell me the exact numbers, but I believe you can take them down to 10% remaining and recharge them, and they'll still give you full life cycles. A lot of the chemistry has gone into the batteries. So, I'm not going to tell you whose is good and whose is bad. There's a lot of difference in there's not a lot of chemistry difference. Okay, a lead acid battery is a lead acid battery is a lead acid battery.
Right.
But how you make the plates, how you stack the plates, how you support them, their density versus the volume of acid, all of that plays into how easily they charge, how well they discharge. Do they give long durations at low current draws or really high current draws but for a very short time?
Right.
We call that starting versus a deep discharge, a trolling motor, or house batteries. I had done some research, and I right now am going with an Odyssey battery out of Pennsylvania, and they make them up there, and they're still a lead acid technology, but they're really dense packing it. And they didn't spiral wound it. They figured out a way to mount the thin plates with more plates in the cell in the gelled solution in such a fashion that it's structurally sound without losing the space. One of the downsides to the spiral wounds is the case. If you look at it, because looks like a 6-pack of beer.
Right.
Well, all of those curved spaces could have lead and acid in them, which would give you more capacity. But because of the spiral woundings, you have those voids, between them. So they made the case void shaped. Odyssey's figured out how to not do the spiral woundings, but still have all the other benefits. And so far, knock on wood, it has worked well for me. It has supported the winch. It has supported, all my electrical gear, the few lights that I run. I don't have a whole lot of lights, but yeah. At this point, I'm giving them 2 thumbs up. It was a good battery. They've worked well, but this is very young in my test run of the Odyssey battery.
Now, see, I'm using I have it in the LJ, and I went ahead because it was $139 at the time. Anyways, it was a Duracell AGM battery from Sam's Club. Mm-hmm. So has that got like plates in it, or is that a spiral? Because it's not a spiral.
No, it's not spiral. It's a plate system. AGM stands for absorbed glass mat, and that is simply a fiberglass mat between the cells, and the electrolyte is in there, and it's not necessarily gelled. And that's one of the things. AGM is kind of a catch-all, and it can be a gelled acid. It can be a liquid acid, just think it's sopping wet towel laid between lead plates. Right. So AGM just means absorbed glass mat. That just means that your electrolyte's absorbed into a non-electroreactive material between your conductors. It says nothing about how thick the plates are, what their surface area to mass ratio is, how they're supported. It doesn't say any of that. Now, yeah, Duracell's got a pretty good track record.
Well, again, it was finger quotations made in USA with a 3-year free replacement. So I'm like, eh.
Yeah, and in Florida here, we unfortunately, like anybody in the southern states, the deep south, whether you're talking Texas, Nevada, Southern California, we have the number one killer of batteries. Heat.
Well, water boils at sea level at what?
212.
And how high is the temperatures under your hood?
Exceeds that.
Exactly.
What's my thermostat?
Yeah.
205. We were just talking about that coming back, weren't we?
Yes, we were.
Yeah, running right now, 210, 215, courtesy of...
And that's just the asphalt.
So anyway, batteries are one of those little subjects that there is no perfect battery, but there is a best battery for you.
Right.
If you're living in Canada, Alaska, where you're dealing with cold weather, you're going to want one that's better at cold weather temperature. You're going to want to pay more attention to the CCA number, cold cranking amps.
Right.
But you also need to keep in mind that maybe you don't throw away that battery insulating blanket that wrapped around it, and you add the little warmer pad underneath so that when you plug in your block heater, you keep your battery warm as well.
Yep.
On the other hand, those of us down here in the sweltering south, maybe you want to shield your battery away from the heat of, that exhaust system you just put on. Or, those of you that are running a turbo, did you run your pipes next to the battery to the point that you're having melting plastic in the housing?
Smells like melted plastic and anger.
So, each one of those, and different manufacturers have batteries that are tailored to those environments. Do you do a lot of deep draw? Okay, you can buy batteries that are really set up for that high amperage, fast crank start. Fantastic for high compression diesel engines and gas engines.
Right.
On the other hand, are you a heavy wincher? Do you do a whole lot of winching, and recovery or that kind of stuff? And therefore, do you need something a little more of the hybrid batteries that's somewhat the starting with the house battery? And obviously, if you're doing the trolling motors or in your RV for your house battery in your RV, where you're doing a long, slow draw, you want to have a house battery, and they have a different plate structure as well.
What about like dual batteries?
Dual batteries, you make a match. Unless you have a specific system with a battery isolation charger between them, the two batteries together are essentially one great big battery. And if you put a house-type battery, a deep discharge battery, and a starting battery so that they're positive to positive, negative to negative, yes, they'll charge, but they'll kill each other. They cannot handle they're basically, I'm not going to go into the electrochemical side, but they're not happy. They don't play well together.
Right.
If you look at and I'll go back to the RV world, where you do have your starting batteries in your vehicles and your Class A's, C's, and B's, but you also have your house batteries. They have an isolator between them. And there's usually the isolator includes a charging circuit so that the starting battery alternator system can charge the house battery, but they can't discharge each other, which can happen. So it's kind of an interesting world. And there's all kinds of little rules with that. And if you're getting into that, go visit some folks at a good battery shop. I was really impressed with the guys at Odyssey. I got on the phone with them, talked to them what I was doing with the Jeep, and they were like, "Yeah, you're kind of one of them hybrid users. Okay, you need that swift kick to start your Jeep. Maybe not as bad as your diesel, but
Right.
On the other hand, you really want that depth for winching." And that's a long, heavy draw. That's not a lightweight load like LED lights. That's a deep discharge.
That's down in the druthers.
That's pulling hard. And so they had a battery they recommended for that could handle it. The interesting thing is it's probably not going to start as well as a starting battery. But a starting battery would die being constantly used for winching.
Yeah.
And it's probably not going to last as long as a deep discharge would in a strictly discharge, but a deep discharge battery will not start your Jeep very well.
Right.
So, it's a trade-off all the ways.
Yeah, that's where the do your own research comes in.
Yeah, and these manufacturers are really happy to talk to you. They really do. Most of them want to have the customer happy with the battery and tell people, yeah, this was great. I got this battery and it does everything I want. And it lasted as long as it did, kind of thing. Yeah. So that's kind of a short, not so short discourse on, them little lead acid things up in the front of your Jeep that everybody hooks up wrong.
Well, and that's the thing with me is that, like, when I bought the the Optima, that was before they had I guess some people kept saying, well, gee, you got 7 years. A buddy of mine got a year out of his. Again, we're not here to argue quality control and brand issues and all that.
But I'll also even challenge that, Optima is a good battery. Yeah. Yes, they changed their plant of manufacture, their origin of manufacture, but they're still built to the same standards. And there are people that'll challenge that. But I can also, half the time when you see Optima, the red top, the yellow top, and the blue top, all are different. Just what I was talking about, starting, deep discharge, moderate discharge. And a lot of the times when you hear about an Optima dying soon, it's because somebody was using a yellow top in a red top application or a blue top in a red top, and
vice
versa. And that will definitely kill it. Or, you tell me, Scott, we've been to many events. How many times do you see the battery and the box is gone and the shielding's gone and the poor battery's sitting next to the radiator getting slowly boiled away?
Yeah. And that's why I went with AGM, because, again, what I do during the day in, day out, these past couple of days, man, not only have friends and family and including my work have air conditioning issues, but batteries, man. I think Friday or Thursday alone last week I think I sold 12 batteries.
Yeah.
And that's a heavy day.
And there's a lot the battery goes through a rough life. And it's a harsh environment in a Jeep, particularly in a Jeep. And
especially a TJ.
Well, I'm going to be honest. Your JKs and JKUs are probably worse because the V6 packs it in a whole lot tighter. And you throw out a lot of heat in that, whereas the old straight six can get hot, but there's a lot of airspace. And the battery's set over there on the passenger side, kind of, up. Well, mine isn't anymore, but up out of the way. It doesn't take a lot to shield that, and that's why the TJs did come with a little sensor, and I actually do see it on a few, and I know yours is still in place.
There,
is that, folks, if you do own a TJ and you take out the battery and you look down in the bottom of the battery tray, there's this little plastic disky thing, and you go to lift it up, and you're like, it's got a wire on the bottom. What the heck is just a wire? And I've seen people take it out. And then they wonder why the check engine light comes on. Folks, that's a battery temperature monitor. They realize that the TJs do get warm enough.
Yeah.
And if the battery starts to get too hot where it's going to kill the battery, you'll get a check engine light. I wish it would be more informative. You have to go look up the P code to find out that your battery's over 10. By the time you've looked up the P code, it's probably dead. But, hey, at least the thought's in the right place.
It's kind of like the Venture Brother episode, where it just says a trouble light.
Yeah.
And his father built the space station. He goes, gee, Dad, thanks. A trouble light. Now they can give it a blinking or some codes behind it. No, let's just put a trouble light on a multi-billion-dollar facility.
Well, what are they going to do? Put this one, bend over, drop your doors, kiss goodbye.
Oh, see, now I got to bleep that out. Causing nothing but more work for me. Nice.
All right. Are you done in here?
Yeah, it's hot. Hold on. I'll grab the button. By the way, I'll go get the door. Hold on. And we're back from the garage segment, and that was kind of cool. Again, it was one of those kind of things where I had a little adventure with a Jeep, and again, it's easy to get caught up, especially when with brand loyalty and all that. But again, I would have never known that a battery, especially a spiral cell, could just die just like poof.
Yeah, it can just. Any of them can drop a cell, as it's called, but that can mean any number of physical things. One thing I didn't tell you in the garage, but this is important, and folks, you can do this yourself and really save yourself headaches, is when you're doing regular maintenance on your Jeep, changing the oil, that's a good time to do it, air filters, whatever. Take a moment, and you're going to have to save the settings on your stereo. I'm sorry. Pull your battery terminals off and clean them, folks. They can look perfectly fine from the outside and build up a thick corrosion layer between the connector and the post. clean them with suitable either emery cloth or
I
a
just did
dedicated wire cleaner.
The twisty thingy at the auto parts store. It's like $6.
There's got to be careful with some of those. Some of them are so aggressive they actually shrink the post terminal. They take so much it looks like lead confetti on top of your battery.
Okay, so on that note, as he said,
yeah. But just get them to a bright condition, bright, and then clean the inside of the terminal as well.
And don't use tire wet on them.
Please don't. And then when you take them off and put them on, ground first off, then power, the plus,
and reverse,
and then reverse to put it back on. Put the plus on first, the red, and then do ground. And the reason that's simple is that if you slip the wrench and the ground is disconnected, nothing's going to short. And if you slip the wrench when you're putting the ground on and hit the chassis, nothing's going to short. If you do it the other way, there's a chance as you tighten the positive, if the wrench touches the body, nice little burnt wrench.
And don't wear wedding bands.
Yeah, please. No metal while you're working on a battery.
Yeah.
When they talk about 600 cold cranking amps, that can be passed through you just as well.
And through that little gold band, and believe me, you're already in trouble for breaking your gold band, and then the burn on top of that.
The fact that you'll never be able to wear one again.
Shouldn't be wearing rings while you're working on a vehicle anyway. See degloving wound.
Oh, yes. So let's go back to emails from
listeners.
Yeah. And we got a lovely little shout from Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Patrick. And Patrick was asking me some questions. He's apparently got himself, I'm trying to remember, what did he have? 2004 LJ.
Yeah, Team LJ.
Yeah, Team LJ. And he's already put the Curry correct link steering linkage on, like I have on Slightly Altered.
And I have on Quantum and Nagelman.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, he's doing something we're not.
Wheeling?
No, he's bending the rod. And he tells me, he says, look, I know I haven't bumped it. I haven't hooked it. I haven't hit it.
Right.
How in the heck can it be bending?
Right.
And that's a really good question, and it's actually going to lead a little bit of an arc here, but we'll use this as a start off. And I have written back to Patrick on the fact that, but what he asks is a good question, which is very common, whether you have a Curry link or the factory spaghetti linkage.
Right.
I'm
Play
sorry.
school, my first steering.
Yeah, it's pretty light gauge, folks. Yeah. And people are bending the tie rod, and that is in the inverted Y steering system. That's the rod that goes from the steering box to the passenger's wheel. And then there's another tie link that goes from the middle of that rod over to the driver's side.
Right.
And they're seeing those rods bend, and it's happening more frequently now, even though they haven't bumped a rock or a tree or nosed into the ground. And a lot of people are, you sit there and the after trail stories and, oh, yeah, you hit something. You just, no, I didn't, Yeah, you got to. You
had to have done it.
You had to have done it. And
I told you, driver, and you went passenger.
And the truth is, folks, yeah, they can bend on their own. And it's a weird scenario, but let's kind of draw you a little mental picture.
Like you talked earlier, finding in process of elimination.
Correct. If you were to take your steering linkage off, okay, everybody can kind of mentally picture that I've got no linkage, so now my two front wheels are free to pivot on their ball joints wherever they feel like.
Look me, I'm playing Chevy, pigeon-toed.
Well, with no power to that front wheel, okay, if you pull forward, those two wheels are going to go out, and the right wheel is going to turn to the right, and the left wheel is going to turn to the left, and it's going to splay.
Right.
All right. Now, that's without power. That's an important fact. They're going to splay. Now, most of the time, Jeeps are driven on road. Unless you're a dedicated wheeler, let's be honest, the largest number of Jeeps drive on the road, without power to the front axle. And so that splaying force that would make the wheels turn outwards is why the tie rod's in the front. That and the other real reason, which is we have a thing called a front drive shaft on the backside and an oil pan and an engine and other stuff that's in the way. So these axles have, front steering linkage or front linkage versus rear linkage, which is in a lot of the cars and A-arms, and some of the pickup trucks with independent front have rear linkage. Now, what that means is under the vast majority of your driving, that steering connection, that whole linkage assembly is under tension. We all know that you can take a string and pull on it really hard, and it doesn't bend when you're pulling. But if you push, your hands together, it suddenly gets really floppy and loose.
Yeah.
And so what happens, though, is the whole scenario I talked about was only without power.
Right.
Now, let's throw power in. Let's engage that transfer case. Not just 4-wheel high. Let's go into 4 low.
Or the force multiplier on torque.
Correct. Now, if you took that linkage away and you hit the gas, that front steering, particularly if your rear wheels are slipping,
It's going to suck in.
they're gonna go pigeon toe on you. So, what's that tell you about the forces that are on that tie rod?
Yeah.
It's compression. It's not tension.
Right.
Folks, with what we do with our Jeeps, we change the gear ratios. We put larger tires on them. We make more aggressive rubber tread patterns that can grip. And then we go out on trails where we're spinning, and those front wheels are the first thing that contact. Maybe they're the first thing that move out of the mud onto the rock.
Right.
This tremendous shock load of those 2 front wheels attempting to pigeon toe
Right.
as you're spinning the wheels, and they bite suddenly.
Especially if you're aired down.
Especially if you're aired down. That can put enough compressive force on that rod that it buckles.
Yeah, because it's designed to be tension out, not push in.
Pushed in, because we're not supposed to be out there rock bouncing that original front axle.
Yeah, come on.
Well,
it can take it.
Well, in some cases it can, and some cases it can't.
Right.
So what is happening? How about let me give you another one? All right. You know that I've done some mods to my Jeep, and the Curry Correct links hooked up to a nice PSC steering box with Flaming River shafts and the whole 9 yards. And you've seen me go up trails where I had to sidewall. Okay, and folks, you know what I mean by sidewall is there's no air, there's no ground under the tire. It's all hanging off the side biters on the tire.
Right.
You know, turning the rim into a mud pizza disc. And I know Dory followed me right on up the same way.
Yep.
But when you turn your steering box to a right turn, all right, and your right wheel is up against a rock, a tree, a bank, a curb. With large diameter tires, you can generate enough force to actually, again, buckle your front steering linkage. Particularly the stock stuff will bow, okay? Because the stock steering linkage has some bends in it already to clear the diff cover. And every one of those creates what's called, in engineering terms, a stress riser in the metal. In other words, a weak spot where it's more likely to bend. So can you bend those steering linkage, even the Curry link? Yes. Now, I know I can hear it. I can hear all the guys out there with the crossover steering.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's why I went to crossover link. Guys, the crossover linkage can do it too.
Yeah.
You know, there are some uber crossover linkages of massive steels, and I get it. You do have a very strong cross connect rod between the toe front wheels that will tend to eliminate that pigeon toe effect right up until the steering knuckle fails.
Right.
And this is something that I've seen more and more happenings. You start looking that we're starting to see steering knuckle failures. You know, the arms are cracking. And this leads to, what was the term? You coined a great term.
I did?
Yeah, about...
the arms race?
The arms race.
Yes.
Folks, let's go way back in Jeep world. And you know, and it's an arms race between us, the users, and Jeep, the builders.
Right.
The first Jeeps, early on, I'm not even going to get to the very first Bantams, but you know the production Jeeps, they had a Dana 25 front axle.
Right.
With its associated, and if you think the TJ and YJ linkage is spaghetti, you ought to see the little, sticks that were on some of them.
Right.
And they were a different altogether kind of steering linkage, not a inverted Y system, but a double Y linkage system. And there are some comical pictures of early Jeeps that are sitting on the side of the road with the front wheels pointing both opposite directions, where the linkage is just flat let go. Their connections were known to fail under relatively light loads.
Right, yeah.
And back then, if you put
they didn't have the tires; they had the military tires.
Correct. So there wasn't that much stress to kill them, and they were dying. But we, when people started modifying them, okay, we need to up spec. Jeep goes, all right, we're gonna kind of roll with this, and we'll go from the 25 to
the Dirty 30.
The Dirty 30, which gets a lot of bad press, but as I've said in a prior show, it's really not a bad axle.
No, not at all.
Within what
it's
if
service
you use
limits
it for what it was designed for.
Yeah.
Dana made a really nice axle, but then we started going, and folks, those of you who may not remember the H series tires, the letter series, where you had an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H height.
Right.
But we started, you're supposed to be running a C15 whatever, and now you're running this H series tire that was basically off of a farm truck, and it looked like it might have been all of 28 inches in diameter.
Yeah, but on a flat fender.
On a flat fender with a Dana 30 with a closed knuckle, and they were checking out, and people were so the aftermarket responded and they started upgrading, and so Jeep's like, oh, okay. They hung on to the 30. They really did, because it wasn't a bad axle.
Well, it's still on there now.
It's still on there now. But then they started going, okay, for you hardcore folks, we'll upgrade to a Dana 44.
44.
Now, folks, 44 is originally designed for pickup trucks. All right. That was under the back end of a lot of Chevys and Fords through history as the rear axle on a frickin' pickup truck.
Oh, yeah. Same thing as a axle on the Isuzu Rodeos. It's on the Nissan Frontiers.
And so we jump up to the 44s. That's what I've done on the front of mine and in the back, and it's doing pretty well. But I know plenty of people that are breaking 44s.
Yeah.
So Jeep hasn't made the jump yet, but the aftermarket has. So what can you buy now ready-made to bolt in your Jeep?
Dana 60s.
Dana 60s.
Yeah.
Because what size tires are we going to? We're up in the 50s now. Okay.
Well, and that's the comment I made with you is it's the arms race, because, right now the Jeep Gladiator, 44's front and rear. And of course, everyone, just a day 30, and it's really a 30 and a half. Okay. The point is they put 44's front and rear.
Right.
Okay. Because, again, no one wanted the Dana 30s, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. Well, what's going to happen next? Every Jeep's going to have a Dana 60? No, one, the price is going to be more expensive, but man, these Dana 60s suck. They can't handle my 54-inch mud tires.
Yeah, and my 800 horsepower.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, guys, there comes a balancing point between cost, effective availability, engineering, and what it was designed for.
Well, and all we're trying to say there is, if that's what you want, be prepared to go aftermarket and upgrade. Now, what I'm concerned is we keep pushing the limits in this arms race on axles so that we can run bigger tires. Has anybody looked at the frame? And have they looked at the tabs that the control arms are mounted to?
Right.
Guys, when do we exceed the strength of the frame? Go back to the guys that are the custom builders. They have already pretty much walked away from the factory frames. And almost every one of these high-end Super Jeeps that you see have custom either cut and fabricated frames that are plasma cut in the four pieces, the top, bottom, right, and left, and then welded together by a certified welder, or they're using tubular steel.
It's funny you mentioned that, because on Instagram, there were like 3 different posts in the past week of, hey, anybody want to buy a rolling stock JL frame, motor, and all that? We're just going to build our own from the ground up.
Yeah, all they want is the body tub.
Yep.
And that's because we're now getting to the point in this Jeep arms race that we're exceeding the capabilities of the frame to take the stresses of these monster axles, monster engines, transmissions. With torque multiplication, you get a 4-to-1 Atlas transfer case behind an 800 horsepower LS engine or a Cummins diesel putting out 900 foot-pounds of torque. And I've seen those in the JKs already. Going back to an axle that's geared with a 513, the amount of force. Remember, you're thinking about, oh man, that's going to turn those big 50-inch tires beautifully. But the axle has to try and turn the other way, and the control arms and the frame have to resist that force to allow the wheel to turn forward. Remember Newton's law? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so if you're putting gigatons of power to the ground, the frame has to absorb that back. And that was one of the things in early sports cars as engines kept going up, and they couldn't figure out why certain body styles could not handle all the horsepower being put down. There's the Cobra, the classic Cobra.
Right.
Do you know that most of the winning races, sorry, I'm stuttering there, folks, We're done with the 289, not the 427. The 427 put too much power to the ground, and the chassis couldn't handle it. It was kind of interesting that Carroll Shelby had to actually redesign the AC Cobra chassis with 2 4-inch steel pipes down each side to take the power of just the 289, much less the bracing for the 427, 428, or 429s that people have put in them. It's impressive in a straight line, but I've been to the track and seen a 427 launch in a Cobra, an AC Cobra, lifting the nose up, and you ought to see the body twist.
Yeah.
I mean, I laugh. My TJ, Scott, you've been in Slightly Altered when I've punched it and seen it lift the driver's front tire up almost off the ground, and that's with the straight 6. Granted, it does have the Edelbrock head and a few other tweaks,
yeah.
But I'm just talking about a straight 6, and I can already twist the stock frame. You start doing these massive things. So this is the arms race, folks, and it's interesting for me as an engineer. I kind of watch it both with this mix of fascination and horror, because people are doing that without realizing that, okay, I can make the axle stronger. Something else has to be the fusible link. What's the next piece that can break?
Right.
And it's wild to see what we can come up with. But it's also horrifying to see what happens when people push the limits too far. And this is not a saying don't do it. It's just think about it, because you're pushing things faster than even the manufacturers can. The LJ is stronger than the Willys ever was. It has to be. It weighs 4 times as much.
Yeah, pretty much.
The ideas of a little Jeep are gone.
Yeah,
I don't even see. I'm wondering if they're going to do away with the LJ. I'm sorry, not LJ, JL 2-door eventually. Because the sales numbers on the 4-doors are so huge.
Nah, there's always going to be a spot for that.
Yeah, but look at follow the thought with the Gladiator.
Yeah,
They chose not to even issue. There's just that one prototype 2-door, sexy as it is.
Well, and again, they wanted the 4-door for the wheelbase for towing, and there is a market out there for people who want the pickup truck. With just case in point with you, you don't want a crew cab,
not anymore.
Yeah,
had one for the last 3 trucks and don't need it. Don't want to pay for it. And it's amazing what I found out how much when you take 4 feet off the length of a truck, how much cheaper it gets and how much better gas mileage it is. But that's a whole nother show.
Exactly. So on that note, I think we have actually run out of time, because we've gone almost an hour and 10 minutes.
Well, you do have to edit out the oopses and the dead batteries and the unspoken words, but duly noted. So I guess it is enough time to talk,
Enough talking.
Yes, I think we've done enough talking time, as we always say, to lock hubs. Those of us that do have locking hubs.
Yes.
Put the Jeep down into 4 low and hit the trail.
Plus, take nothing but memories, pictures, and your trash when you leave the trail.
Yeah. And be sure to check in for the next podcast of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. And again, if you want to see us goof things up and hear all of the mistakes, please feel free to join our Patreon group, and you'll have access to the videos.
Yes, and I'll put the link down in the show notes.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precautions, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.